it's a really funny thing because in preparation for this, you sent me a list of questions and you said, what are the obstacles that you've overcome in your life? And I had to think really hard because I've never really looked at anything in life as an obstacle.
Welcome to Great Conversations with Nicola O'Donoghue, the podcast where everyday individuals share their extraordinary stories of struggle, success, and the wisdom they found along the way. How would your life be different if you had more confidence in yourself? That is the question I walked away with after speaking to my guest today. In spite of humble beginnings, Rory O'Hare has forged a path to success through hard work, a willingness to embrace new opportunities, and an unwavering belief in himself. What struck me as I chatted to Rory was the strength and confidence he derives from his belief in the goodness of humanity and the community he has built around him. This is the confident yet humble Rory O'Hare. Rory O'Hare, welcome to Great Conversations. How are you today?
Thank you very much. Really well, really well. Very excited to be doing this actually with you.
So we'll just sort of ease you in with a very easy question. Who is Rory O'Hare?
Gosh, 43, married, father of two, born of Irish parents, but born in Manchester. Might not sound it. I moved away when I was 5 and I've found my way back here probably about 5 years ago. A lawyer. I started as a partner at a law firm in September. Prior to that, I'd been working in law for over a decade. And prior to that, messing about in sales and all sorts of things down in London and enjoying myself. So yes, that is Rory O'Hare. That's me.
And tell me, who was Rory O'Hare age 5 when you left Manchester? Tell me about him.
A little goody two shoes, I think. Probably my entire childhood, a very polite, very well-mannered young boy. Still am. Keen to please, smart, athletic, I suppose, kind of just cracked on with things.
Where did you grow up when you left Manchester? Where did you go? Like, what was
So we moved to Blackpool, which is, wow. Yes, my dad was, he was a primary school teacher. He was a deputy head here in Manchester and then got a headship in 1985 over in Blackpool. And so we upped sticks and moved as a family. At that stage, had a little brother who was probably 1. And we moved across and set up our life there. And that was me until the age of 18. But always, I suppose I always knew that I was never going to stay there. That was probably the one overriding feeling that I had is that whilst it was a great place to grow up, I always knew that I was never going to stay there. And so when I hit 18, it was the first thing I could do to get away. And
what was it like, despite the fact that it was fun to grow up in Blackpool? What was it about Blackpool that you just knew wasn't the right fit for you?
I think even at that kind of young age, I couldn't see any opportunity there. That I'm thinking about it in terms of I still feel as though I'm got that kind of second generation migrant type of approach. My grandparents were all Irish. My grandparents had gone over to on my mum's side had gone over to the States before moving to Manchester. My dad had gone to university, but only in kind of a postgraduate or kind of once he'd started working. So I was like the first really from kind of my family to go off to university. And therefore it was that kind of academia is important, go and get a profession. Law had been in my head from the age of, primary school age. I remember being that kid in primary school saying, I'm going to be a lawyer when I grow up. I thought I was going to be a barrister. I thought I was going to have the wig and the gown and stand in court and do all of that, but that never came off. Um, but and when I looked around Blackpool, I didn't see that opportunity to do it there.
Yeah.
I didn't see that potential to stay.
When you were at that age, did you process it at all and sort of know what it actually meant to be leaving your home and a place where you knew you wouldn't return to?
My parents had always brought me up. I think it was a case of they'd always given me the confidence, and I suppose from their own journeys as well, and knowing, I knew that my dad had left Ireland to come over to England. Um, I knew that my grandparents had gone to the US to work. That was always kind of within that story. So there was always a sense of my parents were giving me the skills that I would be able to go away and go somewhere and do my thing somewhere else. I suppose it was reflected in my friendships as well. My friendships at the time were very they were temporary. I was very good friends with people until a point, and then I moved on. So when we changed schools, I would lose contact with the friends that I had in the last one, make new friends. And then when I went off to university, there was a group of friends that I left behind that it, I just went off, and that was it. I didn't really see them again. And that's quite a strange feeling to have in terms of leaving those friendship groups behind and just moving on. But for me, it was just that natural progression.
I'd love to know how you do that, like what's your process, because I think that's one of the things that a lot of people struggle with in their life is change, and knowing when any relationship, you know personal or professional, has sort of run its course. It sounds as if that's something that you've never struggled with, and I would love to know how.
For me, I'm excited by the new opportunity. And so I've never sat and dwelt on what I had. And therefore, it's not been one of those things that I thought, well, I've got to fight really hard to keep what I have now, because I've always looked forward to that new opportunity, to the new door opening. It's not so much knowing when it's ready to move on. I just don't have the capacity. I'm very much in the present in terms of the friendship groups that I have and the people that I'm associating with. And I've had to work really hard, actually, because I do know the value of long-term friendships. And I've had to work really hard to make sure that there have been some friendships that I've built up over the years that I actually, I've said, this is a friendship that I shouldn't move away from, that I've got to work really hard to try and maintain that. And, don't just walk into the next room and leave those people behind. So there have been a few key relationships, a few key friendship groups that, and to an extent, that's also because of my wife now, that they're friends that we've made together. And therefore their role within our life is important to us rather than just me. And so therefore I've worked hard to kind of maintain those. So it's never been a case of thinking, right, time to move on. Let's cut this dead weight.
Yeah.
There's never been any of that. I've had some amazing friendships. I've had some amazing kind of relationships with people along the way, but it's there's just another door that opens in that time in life, and I've just always been the person that steps through it. So whether that was heading off to Scotland from Blackpool to go to St Andrews, when my parents said, well, are you coming home now and finished? I was like, no, I'm going to head straight down to London. They were like, why London? I was like, well, I think that's where it's got to be.
Yeah.
Dick Whittington style. I went down without a job, and within a couple of days, I'd got a job with an estate agency down there. They'd given me a car, the phone, and that was it. But the next chapter of my life started. So
I honestly need to know more about this confidence. Where and how did you develop this innate sense of just confidence and self-worth and self-esteem? Because that takes a lot to hop on a train, go all the way down to London without a job, and just trust that you can make it work trust that the universe will help as well, but trust that you can figure it out and you can make it work. And you were what, early 20s when you're doing that? That takes a lot.
22. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
So where
Um,
did that come from? Like, what was it about your childhood, the parenting, like what influences in your life helped cultivate that in you?
I'd put the confidence down to my dad.
Mm.
He was a primary school head teacher. We were in a small community. Um, the school and the church were next door to each other. He was a really important community figure. So I went to the same primary school, so he was always there. He would do the assemblies. I would see him up at the front doing these assemblies. If there was a sports day, if there was something happening at church, it was often my dad who was up at the front, leading it, doing things. I just thought that's how you needed to be.
That's a wonderful story about your dad. It's the power of parents, isn't it? As they role model certain behaviours, and would love to know what other characteristics from your father have you adapted and are, I guess, passing down to your children now.
Well, that's a really interesting thing about passing down, because I'm very conscious that my two boys, who are 10 and 8, they don't get to see me in the same circumstances as I got to see my dad.
Mm.
And therefore, that innate confidence that I kind of inherited from him, I suppose, I think, how can I pass that on to my children? How do you, and it's the great social experiment, kids, how do you craft a sensible, normal human being and give them the opportunity to go and experience life with the same advantages and the same kind of outlook that you had, and give them the best start that you can. And I'm very conscious of how can I do that. In terms of kind of those things that I've got from my dad, I think his faith is a really strong one that I've kind of picked up. His kind of belief in God, which I think goes some way to kind of saying about the confidence.
Mm.
When you kind of run into a room and think, throw my hands in and just it's going to be okay. A lot of that actually comes from faith as well. I know that there is. I certainly believe that there's a higher power, and that I not that I'm going to be looked after more than anyone else, but that I put my faith in. If I go out and I do my best, then good things will happen rather than bad things. And so, that's where that. So I would like to think I pass on that kind of belief to my kids, and I think that's a really strong bit that I've inherited from certainly from my dad.
It's so interesting, just even thinking about confidence and how you anchor that within your life. And you referenced earlier when you went to St Andrews, and I can only imagine that you were surrounded by similar people like I was at Oxford, as you said, public school, very very privileged, very wealthy people who derived their confidence from their privilege, from their ancestral money, and just I guess their history and their standing and status within society. And I guess for those that don't have that, where are our other sources where we can derive our own confidence and belief in ourselves? And I really find it very interesting as you chat about your dad. You've mentioned faith. I also wonder if another part of that is in service of community and others. So that confidence from knowing that actually you're connected to something bigger than yourself. And yes, your faith in God is a part of that for you. And also there's the community that's around that as well.
Very much so. I think within that, it's kind of that mix of the volunteering gene and that faith element kind of come together. That and looking at something done badly is another thing. I am I still attend church on a weekly basis. Faith has been a really big part of my life growing up. When I was down in London, or during my kind of university phase, and kind of when I was kind of finding who I was and working out who I was, and what part faith and religion played in all of that, I stopped attending church. And it was only when I was back down in London that I realized I was missing that element, missing that community of church goers, and kind of that wider community of being part of something bigger than just my immediate circle. It creates that wider sense of community that I think is really important to us in kind of life.
And what you're talking to is obviously your church community is united around a shared belief and shared faith in God and religion. And that's obviously the anchor to a lot of communities. And I think what you're talking to is actually one of the real manifestation in society now has been the disintegration of community and the vast loneliness that a lot of people feel, because what you're describing is very similar to my childhood. Church was not necessarily for my parents, but for my grandparents, definitely. We went to church every Sunday. I was in the church choir. It was the meeting place for the community. Everyone would know if you didn't go and gossip about each other. And I think that was the space where people went. And as people started to move away from church and religion, and in some ways, rightly so, because there's such a hypocrisy, personally, is what I feel, and what they espouse of, this concept of Jesus and accepting of everybody, but yet the intolerance within the church community around how people live their life and who they choose to love and that type of thing. And so I feel as people started to, I guess, question, as with the opening up of the internet and the world to viewpoints and ways of being that we just didn't see when we were growing up, because all we ever saw was the sort of few streets around us and whatever was in the local paper. So as people started to sort of question, I think that's when people started to move away from these types of institutions. And I think now people are searching and questioning even more, like, what is that anchor? Because it's absolutely okay to question and move away and say, this doesn't resonate with me anymore. What you're united around, this doctrine, this belief, doesn't sit with me. So I'm gonna leave. The lack of alternatives, the lack of connection and ability to then form communities with other like-minded individuals, I think is what a lot of people are really struggling with.
We're a social species. We need that interaction. And I think, we look for communities. We look for things that can bring us together. And, church on a Sunday, but on a Saturday morning, I'm down at the football fields watching my two boys play football, and I manage my eldest's team. But there's a community of people that come to that. You see the same parents there week in, week out. They're stood on the sidelines. It's a congregation, and it has. I mean, in South Manchester, football is a religion,
Yeah.
and but it's a congregation. It's a meeting together of people. It's the same, that need to feel part of something. And I get annoyed with the hypocrisy of the church. I get annoyed with the abuses of the church. But the fundamental connection of the community aspect of the church has been one of its strongest foundations that I've always found. And that's what keeps bringing me back. And that's the main driver for me. And in that community, I find great solace. And when I look out of my, when I go out of my house, I've got neighbors in both directions who are members of the church, who I wouldn't otherwise have known. Another young couple to one side with similar age children who perhaps we would have got to know each other through school, but there's an elderly couple a few doors down, and then there's neighbours around the corner, and I feel that we talk to each other, we speak to each other because of that connection through the church. When I'm in the local village where I am, or in town, and I see members of that church community, we stop and we talk, and it makes me feel as though I belong. It gives a sense of belonging in that wider community. And to me, that's really important. And that's something I've always looked for.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking to is that one of the cornerstones of community is uniting people around a shared purpose or shared set of values, isn't it? So, as you say, on Sundays it's church and faith, on Saturdays it's football, and that's what unites you all together. And it's one of the big, I think similarly to you, I've lived all over the world. I've moved around a lot, and every time I land in a new place, it is that question of, well, how do I find my people? How do I build a community that resonates with me? Because that is what makes me feel like I belong to a place. For me anyway, it's such an important part of feeling grounded or connected to the place that I live. And I always start with, well, what are my hobbies? What am I interested in? As you say, what do I want to be talking about? And for me, it's books. I always go for the book clubs, and it's never seemed wrong because, similar bookworms, and they're my kindred spirits, so to speak. But I know that community has been such a huge part of your life, as you've, like, outside of church and the boys football now, when you were in university moving into London, like, how did you go about then at a younger age, when maybe you were, as you say, you were still trying to figure out who you were? How did you find your community in those times when you were searching and really unsure about who you were and what you wanted for your life?
There were a lot of times that I was lonely, a
Mm.
lot of times that I kind of sat there on a weekend um, by myself, constantly surrounded by people, by tourists, really, really busy, and you feel alone. And
Mm.
you then have to kind of work out, what is it that you want to be part of? How do you want to kind of engage with that? I think that was one of the reasons that I looked to go and find that church community, that community of something else. But also I took up rowing. Well, I took up rowing when I was at law school. I went and joined a boat club when I was down in London as well. And that then gave me another sense of community. So it's through those hobbies, through those, through that sense of doing a shared activity. And that then opened the doors and opened the next chapter of my life, really, after joining what was actually a fantastic, the rowing community is a wonderful community to be part of. It's a very kind of tight knit, quite down to earth group of people, really, and mainly because rowers are so bad at everything else, all the other sports that they do. They're generally the people who lack ball skills, who, I can do one thing and one thing really well, and that's sit in a boat, balance it, and up and down until I pass out. That's rowing, and it's great fun.
The power of sport, isn't it? As you say, the sort of, again, the community that's built around a shared interest. And so you said when you went to London that you were an estate agent, but obviously I know
Yes.
now, because now you're not. Now you're a partner in a law firm. So how did that happen?
I think it comes back to growing up in Blackpool. I had very limited opportunity to know what was out there in the world.
Yeah.
My friends' parents were hoteliers, cafe owners, civil servants, or teachers. That was the scope of it. That was what Blackpool offered. In my head, I wanted to be a lawyer, and a lawyer had a wig and a gown and was in court. And so during the university phase, looking at going to the bar, looking at whether that was going to be accessible for me. Thought, well, I'm not going to get a first, and I didn't go to Oxbridge. So I think the routes to becoming a barrister are really limited. The scholarship, I couldn't afford to put myself through law school, to go to the bar where there was no guarantee of a job, where I was unlikely to get a scholarship, where I didn't have any connections. And I was a little bit disillusioned, really. And, when I kind of finished, my 5 years at university was coming to an end. 4 as a student, 1 as kind of the sabbatical role heading up the union kind of came to an end. Someone said to me, "Oh, I'm off down to London. I'm going to go and become an estate agent. They'll take anyone," which sounded good. After 2 years of working in sales, I applied to law school, left London to go up to York for cost of living. The rest, as they say, is history. That's kind of how that transition happened. And
the way that you're describing your journey into where you are now as a partner of a law firm is actually really phenomenal. So many other partners that I know in law firms, their route to getting where they are has pretty much been mapped out. Not that they didn't work hard at all, but what I mean is there's been a lot of privileged baked in to where, to how they ended up where they did. As I say, it's 100% not discounting the hard work and commitment and ability. For you, the odds were stacked against you. You're the kid from Manchester who grew up in Blackpool, and as you say, you didn't see those people around you. You didn't have those people that could open the doors for you. You didn't have those people that could financially support you. You didn't have those people that, as you say, educated you on this is how you go about getting a training contract. You just blindly followed your ability, your faith, and your belief in yourself. And I think it's wonderful. I'm not saying that. I think for me, that's truly inspirational. I don't know if I would have had your same perseverance and resilience if I'd encountered even half of the barriers that you're speaking to.
You see, and it's a really funny thing because in preparation for this, you sent me a list of questions and you said, what are the obstacles that you've overcome in your life? And I had to think really hard because I've never really looked at anything in life as an obstacle. And I've never really thought that I have encountered obstacles. I have come from a stable home. I never wanted for anything as a child. There was food on the table. My parents would take me, that they were loving, caring parents. Blackpool is one of the most deprived areas of the country.
Yeah.
The disadvantages that children, and I'm not using this and saying, I was part of that, because I wasn't, and it was a different generation. And 30 years ago, Blackpool was a different place. It was much more prosperous than it is now. But even then, it was still what it was. And the routes to access. I mean, you look at Oxbridge now. I mean, I applied to Oxford. I didn't get in. I went for the interview at Lady Margaret to do law. Arrived on day 1, went in, did the written paper, came out and was like, that was tough. And there was a chap from Manchester Grammar School who came out with me. And he went, "Oh, that was a breeze." He said, "All those questions are in that book I was given to read." I was like, "Book? What?" He's like, "Yeah. Preparation for this. Someone just gave me this book and told me I had to read all of this." And he said those were verbatim, the questions, and the answers were given verbatim in the book. And I was like, wow, that's not fair.
Of course it's not.
It's just one of those things. You don't realize that you've been, and this sounds terrible because I don't believe that I've ever been disadvantaged. I've always felt that I've had every possible opportunity to do what I've wanted to do, and my parents have supported me all the way, and I've been part of that. But other people maybe have had more and have benefited from that, but for the grace of my sheer naivety and everything else, I've never allowed that to get in the way of me just plowing through the next door and just walking into that room and just going, yeah, I can do this.
Well,
Let's go.
that's what I'm talking to. And that's what, for me, I find so inspiring is it's not naivety, it's a mindset, and it's a confidence, it's an innate belief and trust in yourself and an ability. It's, as you said before, you don't see obstacles. It feels like you see opportunity, and you see gifts, and you see lessons. So, at many different steps of the way, people might have just given up, or the different people might have given up. It might have been too much. Their mind takes over. It's not going to work. You haven't got what it takes. The barriers are too high. But the way that you go into the world and the way that you see things, that's not the mindset and the narrative that it sounds like you have in your mind. It's, you can do this. Anything's possible. What am I going to learn? But again, I think it's this. I wonder if it is this grounding in your faith and your belief in something bigger than you, because it's that trust that's sort of there, that's driving you. That for a lot of people that don't, it's like, I'm just going to give up. It's not worth it. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's too much.
it's yeah. I agree, and it's on a silly level. It's even at things like if I'm trying to get somewhere in a hurry and the roads are clear, or if I can cross the road and there are no cars, I go, oh, cheers, big man. I feel as though that there's something out there looking after me, and that I'm able to kind of progress, and it's just been a very big part of who I am, and kind of, my journey, I suppose. And that's kind of, it's great.
Honestly, I'm really in awe, Rory. I've never met anyone actually who, like you, who goes into the world with the real sense of awe and wonderment and kindness and love, and have things just work out. And again, I'm not discounting the hard work that you put in, the commitment, your ability, but it's really, really, really wonderful to see.
It's tough because I talk about it, and I feel as though I don't want it to come across as an arrogance or a
doesn't.
I've always just kind of had this belief that if you're a good person to others, and if you're open to others, and if you bring people together and start conversations and kind of create opportunities for people to meet, that people are inherently good. Opportunities happen. Good things happen. Yes, things happen along the way that might set you on a different path. And I've jumped 2 feet into opportunities that have not worked. You've just got to take those opportunities and not see them as a failure on your part in taking that step. And it's just, pick yourself up, move on.
I think what you're talking to is the power of self-love. Because when I think about the concept of self-love, a part of it is how you treat yourself and how you speak to yourself. A part of it is also how you trust yourself. And even what you're saying in situations where events don't go according to plan, or bad things happen, it's the ability, when you have a healthy amount of self-love, that you can disassociate yourself from the situation. You said that before. Things happen. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It means the situation didn't turn out the way that you wanted it to. And again, it's back to that mindset and that ability to look at something, whatever it is, whether life is going great, whether things are challenging, and say, this isn't a reflection about me, this is externally. So do I either tell myself I'm a failure and then go down this spiral of then not believing I'm good enough, looking for evidence that supports this belief that I'm not good at my job, that I'm a failure, that life's stacked against me? Or do I say the situation is such that doesn't affect my self-worth? What can I learn here that I can bring into the future that's going to help me, move towards the life that I want for myself? And I talk a lot about that, about this concept of self-love. It's it's a journey that I'm on. And I've yet to meet somebody until today who actually really is what I'm espousing manifest. And I genuinely do. That's why I say I'm totally in awe, and just the power your story and what you're sharing is actually a reflection of the power of embracing self-love, of trusting yourself.
Oh, and yeah, no, thank you. It's interesting to hear, because I've never put a label on it, and that's just been me. That's just the way I've approached life, and it's not been an intent, but it's very firmly grounded in my upbringing. And I look back and I reflected on at the beginning in terms of just the foundation that I was given through my parents and then their parents on that as well. So it's kind of, I'd love to be able to give my children, my two boys, that same confidence to go out into the world, to just feel as though that if they're open, then they'll do well.
You said it earlier on. You said that the belief that inherently we're all good, and the media, social media, organizations, they like, the polarization of society. It's very difficult to be grounded in that, to believe that there's more that unites us than there is divides us, to believe in the inherent goodness of humans, and just even modeling that and modeling leading with love, I think is the main thing that you can do. So we actually have a closing tradition on this podcast. So I like to ask all my guests, what is one thing that other people value that you don't?
And it's a really, really hard question, but I think a lot of, as I've been saying, a lot of what I really value are people and experiences. One of the things that I've never valued or looked at, and it's not been important to me, has been that urge to travel, to go and see new places. Yes, I've been happy to jump into new opportunities, but I've never. A lot of people I talk to, when they talk about holidays and they talk about kind of traveling and going abroad, they're travelers. I mean, you said it yourself when we spoke earlier that you just got this inherent travel bug. I'm a really content home person. I enjoy being where I am, as long as I'm surrounded by the people that I value. I think I've also said it's probably because I'm ginger and pale, and so
I'm ginger and pale.
Holidays
Rory.
in the sun are just hard work.
I'm ginger and pale. Yeah. I'm not taking that. I'm not taking that at all. Listen, I just want to say thank you so much for giving me your time, for sharing your story. Honestly, it's been hugely, hugely, hugely inspiring for me, and I've loved every minute of it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. No, thank you very much.
Thank you to the amazing individuals who make great conversations possible. My editor, Stian Moritz, musician Jamie Jenkin, and our incredible guests for their openness. Our website, integrate.net, will be launching in September with loads of other exciting resources. In the meantime, feel free to click the links below for more episodes of great conversations. Sending you so much love. Bye for now.